my name is Allison Cohen, and I'll be your trainer for this 5-part introduction to the newest version of TIPWeb-IT, version 5.4.0.0. In this 4th session, we'll be discussing a brand new view for TIPWeb-IT, the warehouse view. This involves all new warehouse processes, and if utilized, is a game changer. So let's take a look. Did I mention it was a game changer? It is a free option that comes with 5.4. A district can toggle on the warehouse feature. Once they do so, it is not something that you can toggle off. It is something that will exist, and it won't really hurt anything if you decide not to use it, but it is something that takes quite a bit of setup, and once you've turned it on, it can affect other processes. So be aware of that. Let's take a look at what the agenda is. All right, so in this view, we've got the admin view. Can convert a site to a warehouse, and your district can have more than one warehouse, so there's the possibility for that. You'll also assign TIPWeb-IT users, so any TIPWeb-IT user that's in the system can be assigned as a driver, and that driver is the one that delivers and picks up items from the warehouse. Now in the warehouse, that's a separate view, so now we have the administrative view, the site view, and a warehouse view. In the warehouse view, there are things called containers, and we'll look at what container types and how to initialize container contents function. And then we'll look at an overview of the transfer process. This is a very in-depth process. There's a lot to talk about for the warehouse view. I could probably spend several hours just going over this feature. So with that in mind, we highly recommend that you take our training on TIPWeb-IT's warehouse view. It is a separate training that we can schedule for your location, and we'll send a trainer out and we'll spend time with your warehouse guys and you guys at the district and help you figure out what's best for you and how to set it up and how all these functioning parts work. So that being said, this is an enhancement video to let you know that this enhancement has been placed in this version 5.4, but this isn't necessarily training on how to use it. So if you need to turn this on and you want to turn this on, I would highly recommend that you give us a call at the customer support number 1-800-495-5993 or email us at support@haysoft.com to schedule a warehouse training, and that way we can either just talk to you about what the implications are. If you've watched this and you still have some questions, of course customer support will help you with that and figure out if that's really something that your district needs to do. All right, so what is a warehouse? A warehouse is a physical space. Could be very simple. It could be, let's say, a simple room within another building, or it could be its own building itself. It just depends on how big your district is. The warehouse itself can be broken into areas or zones, if you will, and you'll see that here with some of these little icons. These zones or areas are created in the rooms area, and we'll take a look at what that looks like in a minute. But you can designate areas within the warehouse so that you know where stuff is being stored. So if I'm taking all of these disposed items that no longer function or need to be recycled or something like that, maybe I've got an area in the corner that's a let's say a disposed zone or a disposed corner. We can put all those items there, and in TIPWeb-IT, if I look up that particular tagged item, it'll say it's at the warehouse in the disposed area with the status of, say, disposed. So very helpful as far as that's concerned. All right, so that's basically a warehouse. Now you'll see in TIPWeb-IT when we get in that you'll need to either create a new site and toggle it to be a warehouse or convert an existing site to a warehouse. But we'll look at that. All right, so what's a driver? A driver is someone who has been identified between all the drivers in TIPWeb-IT. So, or I'm sorry, all the users in TIPWeb-IT. So TIPWeb-IT has a long list of users in the user management screen. Any of those people can be identified as a driver. Okay, so you can have Maria here, who is the site admin, be a driver, and she's at Learning Campus. You could also have Paul here be the administrator at the warehouse, and he could be a driver. And it goes on and on and on. So the admin drive, could also be a driver as well, the district administrator. They have access to all sites and all warehouses. So it's just identifying a person that's already in your user management screen. If you need to add them, of course add them, unless of course you have SSO, then you'll need to go through that process. But you'll just identify them as a driver. What that does is it allows them to control a special part of the warehouse feature. All right, so in the warehouse, we already talked about how there's zones or areas, if you will, and in those areas, you can, let's say it's just a giant open space, like your warehouse is a giant open room. They don't have, actual like nooks and crannies. We haven't even taped anything off on the floor. Maybe there's just racks and racks and racks and racks. So we've left it very flexible so that you can actually get down to a very detailed focus of where certain items are being stored. So if you wanted to, say, identify your aisles, the bay, like for instance, this is bay 1, and if there's several others, there would be, more over here, right, going down the aisle. Think of IKEA, right? And the way IKEA is organized. Okay, and then you have level 3, level 2, level 1, and so on. So you can get very specific with those identifiers at the warehouse level and make it your own. You may not have a disposed corner. Maybe you're specifically putting them in certain areas. You can be very detailed. Okay. Now, as you saw on the previous screen, there were boxes and pallets and things like that. We talked about earlier the fact that containers are part of the warehouse feature now. And so containers are those large items, or boxes, pallets, bins. It could even be like a shipping container like we see here. These containers hold things. So they hold, individually tagged items or a whole bunch of untagged items. Maybe this whole container is full of beanbag chairs. If you watch the previous videos, you get that joke. So these containers have types, and so there's pallet as a type, a wire mesh bin as a type. Anything that you want to categorize a container as, because a container can hold, again, tagged and untagged items. And the best part about this is it's very similar to the component feature that TIPWeb-IT currently has, where you can identify a parent and like a laptop cart, and assign laptops to the laptop cart. And anytime you move the laptop cart, all those little laptops go with it. Okay, same thing here. In the warehouse, if I move this blue box with all 26 items inside of it, if I move it from, let's say, bin 3 to the shipping area, I can do that very easily, and all those little items go with it. Okay, and just like the component feature, if this container is marked as recycled items, for instance, then everything within it, all tagged and untagged items, will be listed as in the status of recycled. Okay, I should also mention as well that untagged items that we discussed in the previous video actually can be counted at the warehouse. So you can have pallets and pallets and pallets of things that are untagged and actually have a count. So here at the warehouse, untagged items can be itemized and counted. So that is a benefit as well. So if you want to track how many keyboards you have or how many mice you have, you absolutely can do so. It can only happen at the warehouse though, okay? All right, so in the past video, we talked about the transfer process. So we talked about this life cycle. We talked about restricted funding sources and how that can be involved. And we talked about the two potential approval processes. So going off of this existing model that we saw in the previous video, what does a warehouse transfer look like? Okay, so we have a warehouse here, and they also have a funding source possibility to again, if those E-rate or Title I or whatever you guys want to restrict as far as funding sources are concerned, if there's something that's on a transfer that has a restricted funding source, again, only those people assigned to the funding source can approve that to move forward in the site-to-site transfer or warehouse-to-site transfer process. So that still applies here. We still see the two possible approval destination site admin approval processes to say, well, does site XYZ really want this stuff? But the new part is because it's coming from a warehouse, and a driver and a pickup date have to be assigned. When they are assigned, then they can be put in transit, and then it can go to the other processes that we're used to dealing with. Now, coming from a site to a warehouse, it's a little bit different. The site still has the funding source speed bump. So if there's something on there that has a restricted funding source, that approved person or people in TIPWeb-IT have to approve it before it can move forward in the transfer process. The warehouse can approve whether or not they want you to send them stuff, okay? Once the site gets approval from the warehouse and puts the item in transit, again, a driver and pickup date are assigned, but the warehouse is just going to absorb those items as soon as they get transferred. So there is no second approval process for the warehouse. So and again, it's just meant to streamline things. The driver has the ability to edit what is being picked up. So that's a little bit different than what you see maybe in the first model, because there's no one with the ability to edit unless something's denied and pushed back to the site. Now, the warehouse driver that's been assigned can go in and modify, oh, there weren't 25 chairs, there were only 22 chairs, or maybe there were 25 chairs, but 3 of them, were beanbags and they had holes in them and they were leaking everywhere. So those sorts of things can be assigned by the driver, edited by the driver, and then drivers have special privileges when it comes to handling those transfers, okay? And that's both at the warehouse to site transfer level and the site to warehouse transfer level. Okay, so what does all of this look like in the program? So let's do that. Let's go ahead and move forward. I'm going to change my screen and share my screen so that you guys can see TIPWeb-IT. And so you should be seeing the home page at this point. I am in currently as a district administrator. Let me show you what it looks like in the site screen to be able to identify a warehouse. So we have site types that can be assigned. So warehouse obviously is a good choice there. You'll see here on the site grid that warehouse is either true or false. So if I refresh this screen, you'll see that, Bright Elementary, for instance, is false. But the East warehouse is true. So you don't have to change the name to include warehouse for it to be listed as a warehouse, okay? If we look at the East warehouse, you'll see here that we've got the same product information and counts that you would normally see when you look at the sites in TIPWeb-IT. Part of the details screen, you'll see site ID, name, region, etc. All of the same things are true that you've seen traditionally with a site, but now we have the warehouse toggle. So if I click edit, and I've got warehouse checked, notice it's grayed out at this point. Once a site has been converted to a warehouse, there is no going back. That site and all of the little things on that site, if you convert an existing site in TIPWeb-IT, will become a warehouse. And that warehouse does not allow for students, but it does allow for staff. So if you accidentally switch over a site like, say, Dixon Elementary, that's not good because there's kids on that site, and it will warn you that that's not a good choice. So again, we highly recommend training on this feature. There's just so much to go over. But if you mouse over the question mark, this site is a warehouse. Warehouse sites allow for managing untagged assets and containers, which is basically the goal here, is to be able to manage the things a warehouse manages. Okay, so what is it, now that we know how to convert the site to a warehouse, we've got the assign users as drivers portion for the district admin level. So again, the district admin level needs to first create a warehouse, either by adding a new warehouse or by converting an existing site. Under under management on the quick links area, under users, you'll see here that when this loads, we've got all of our normal users that are generally here. Now we have a new column called driver. So if we want to look and see who's a driver, we've got several people who are allowed to be drivers. And so, for instance, we'll open, Clint East. We'll take a look at Clint East. So here's Clint East. He has been assigned to the East Warehouse, Bright Elementary, and Valley Ridge High School. He's a driver, and here's his basic information. So be aware that that has to be turned on in order for transfers to take place. A warehouse has to have at least one driver. So this is a required step. It's very easy to do. You just click on the edit pencil, and you would be able to set whether or not the driver is toggled on or off. So you can remove driving privileges without removing them from your user management grid, but it is something that has to be turned on if you use the warehouse feature. So drivers are users who are responsible for delivering transfers set to and from the warehouse. So any shipment, and we saw that in that diagram, right? Any shipment that's coming to a warehouse or from a warehouse, like being delivered from a warehouse or someone sending something to the warehouse, those have to be picked up by a driver. So this is essential. All right, so we'll go ahead and go back home. So what does a warehouse look like? Let's go ahead and jump into there. So I'm going to jump into, let's go to East Warehouse. You'll notice too that when we did the view switch just then, the warehouses are at the top. Okay, so warehouses are being prioritized over the sites. So if there are more than one items to be displayed, or as far as sites to be displayed, the warehouses are going to be categorized together, and then the sites are going to be categorized together. So we've labeled all of our warehouses with the word warehouse, but that doesn't mean that you have to. They will be categorized in their own area, so it's easy for you to jump to and from. Okay? All right, so here on the notifications page for a warehouse, you have additional notifications. So we saw in the previous video the transfer notifications for traditional site-to-site transfers. Warehouse notifications are also a part of this. So inbound transfers that are coming, outbound transfers that need to go, these are all things that require drivers. So these areas here are assigning and identifying delivery dates, etc. Okay, at the top we see that this screen's just a little bit different. We have home, catalog, purchasing, and containers. So containers is a new menu option at the top grid. Rooms, staff, inventory, and audits. So inventory is also new as well. Inventory for a warehouse includes untagged assets and tagged assets. So therefore, the inventory screen is very similar to the tags screen that you see in the admin view or the site view, but here at the warehouse, because this whole point of the warehouse was to be able to track untagged items as well, you can now use the inventory grid just like you would the tags grid to search for and locate items that are held within the warehouse, and that includes untagged. Okay, so the filters include a little bit of changes like container number, that sort of thing, but this works exactly the way you see your tags grid work. You still can save searches, etc. Okay, but it will now be able to search for untagged items as well as tagged. Containers is the other area, but first I want to go into rooms just to show you that. Rooms at a warehouse are the designators of those areas where things can be stored. So if I want to identify aisle A, first shelf, first bin, I certainly can do so and have it, and I can update the room types to allow for bin location versus storage. But a warehouse is just like any other warehouse. They also have, they have areas that they can store things in, like there's storage here. You can have offices at a warehouse because, you know, there's people there and they have to work. So you can also assign things like you would traditionally to a room on a warehouse. Like, for instance, the warehouse manager's office may contain a desktop computer and a printer and etc. And those things can be assigned traditionally, just like you would see at a site. But in addition to that, you can see all of the bin locations as well. Okay, so going to containers. Containers are those things that house items. So we have container description, container type, status, location, if it's received, and container inventory. As you can see, there's just a ton of information to talk about here, but basically what's going on here is that we've got a container type that we've created, like pallets, wire mesh bins that are large, etc. And those can be managed under the management area on the left-hand side on quick links. Okay, so just similar to like a product type or a room type, these are container types. The container themselves can have a status. When that status has been applied, everything within that container has been applied that same status. So let's take a look at this one that's used for parts. Container 46, and it says computer cables is the name of the container. So we've got untagged inventory in this box. The product name is network cable. There's cables, and so far there's 12. Okay, and so we've got 12 cables that are marked for use for parts. You can update the names of the containers to be very specific, or you can make them very generic. For instance, we've got inkjet printers that are in the status of recycled in a wire mesh bin. When we look at that, we've got several different kinds of printers. We've got one that's or 7 that are untagged, so maybe they're the ancient ones, I don't know. And then we've got 4 that are tagged. And so these things are ready to be sent to the recycle. So again, all of these items are going to include the same status as the container itself. And just to show you what that looks like, I'll go ahead and click on one of these tags so that you can see the status of the tag is actually the status of the container. There we go. There's that inkjet, and it is in the status of recycled. And here's an interesting thing too. The warehouse is the site, right? Is the name of the site, but the location is a little bit more specific now. We're used to seeing these little icons off to the side. However, in this situation, a warehouse has a little bit more data to talk about, and containers specifically are that. So room EA2B, which is probably a bin location, and then container 48. Now I can jump to either of these to see what's going on with that. So I can go to this room or this location in my warehouse, and it says here that I've got those inkjet portable printers. This is my inventory itemized by product, just like you would normally see in a room, but we have an additional tab now called containers, which show you the names of the containers, and in this case there's only one container in this location. And it contains 24 items. So be aware of that. When you receive from a untagged items, or untagged items need to be cataloged at the warehouse, they have to be held in the container. The container is the descriptor, and so we're able to put untagged and tagged items in a container, but untagged items have to be in a container. So that's the other thing that goes on there. All right, and again, guys, there's just a ton of stuff to go over. I'll show you that on the container screen. We can easily create a container. For instance, let's say container 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to call it beanbags. And I'm going to say it is a extra large wire mesh bin. Okay, the status of these are, let's say, disposed. These are all broken beanbags, right? And I want this container to live, let's see. I'll just choose this one here on aisle A, level 3, bin 2. Okay. We can also identify weight and value and put notes in as the container name. So when I save this container, my beanbag container, there it is. There's my beanbag container. Currently it has nothing in it, right? Because I just built it. But I want to put beanbags in it that don't have stickers, right? They don't have tags, and they're untagged items to begin with. So getting started, you guys can initialize inventory into containers just like you would at a site by initializing items into rooms. I'm going to say that these are untagged. I'm going to look up my beanbag item. There's my beanbag. And I'm going to say there's lucky number 13 broken beanbags in this area. So as you can see, it's automatically being given the status of disposed. Now, if I messed up and put the wrong count, or I need to edit this in any way, I can just remove it and do it again. So the functionality is similar to what you're seeing in the rooms at the site level. And I can put tagged items in here too. So if I want to put a tagged item in here, I can. It toggles the screen to allow me to enter a tagged number. Okay, not difficult, just different. And again, it's a big conversation. I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about warehouses and process and how you might want to do things. But this is a big release. Again, this is the biggest release we've ever had for TIPWeb-IT outside of the initial release of the product being launched. So lots of changes here. Things to keep in mind though, a warehouse does not allow for students. It does allow for untagged inventory to be identified and tracked in the inventory grid, and then also in containers, and you can run some reports, which we'll talk about in the next video. But you've got all the same other features that you would normally have, just it's a little bit different. So this view is different, drivers are required, etc. So let me go ahead and stop the share. We'll go back and change the screen. I'm going to go here just to remind you guys that this is a game changer. Once you turn this on, there is no turning it off. So be aware of that. We did talk about converting sites to warehouses. We talked about assigning drivers. In the warehouse, we talked about containers, container types, initializing contents, and then the overview of the transfer process. And again, that was just a generic overview. There's a whole lot that goes into assigning pickup dates and drivers and that sort of stuff. So again, I'm going to highly, highly recommend that you guys definitely have training over this feature. And we have a specialized warehouse training class that's been geared just to explain the district level and the site level all in one class. So there's a lot of conversation to go with. So definitely give us a call and talk to us, see if this is a good choice for your district to start utilizing. If it is, you may want to schedule some training to make sure that you guys are using it to the fullest capability and that there's not a lot of bumpiness to it. So definitely give us a call. The phone number's on the screen, and I will see you in the next session. Thanks for joining me.